Hey, good afternoon, everybody. This is Justin Roth, JamPlay. Glad to be here again today with you today. Cool to follow up from Jim's class or workshop. We're talking about DADGAD. I'm going to be staying in DADGAD as well, but I'm going to be doing a little different approach, kind of showing you some of the basics for two-hand tapping. I'm going to just play a couple examples if you're not familiar with the style, but then also kind of break down some tips on how to get the most out of the style, how to get the best tone out of it, and go from there. So I'm going to be playing in DADGAD tuning, as I mentioned, like Jim was playing. And I'm going to do a song of mine called Fatima's Waltz to start, and then we'll break it down, look at what the right hand's doing, what the left hand's doing, and go from there. All right, so that's long and short of it. That's a style of one of the many ways to approach two-hand tapping. This style kind of has always inspired me. I first heard it many years ago here in the great Michael Hedges and Billy McLaughlin, who really pioneered this sort of approach for this style of two-hand tapping. And there's been a lot of deviations of it since. What I really love about this style is that it's very melody-driven as opposed to percussive-driven. There's a lot of two-hand tapping that really kind of turns the guitar more into like a drum, doing a lot of cool riffy stuff. But this one's really about providing support, chordal support with the right hand, playing the bass notes, and the melody in the left hand. Now, one of the things that really makes this style work is that since you only have one hand playing the melody, we're going to start with the left hand, talking about how do we execute the melody, is that since we only have one hand that is not, none of the notes are being picked by the right hand, so the speed of the notes and the amount of notes and that we get to play are only accessible from one hand, and because we're having to tap a note and hold it, we're limited in our reach. So using alternate tunings pretty much is almost required for this style, because for every note that I can fret to come up with this melody, I can also use the pull-offs to use the open strings that are more or less in the key that I'm playing in, so that it doubles the amount of notes I'm able to get to by creating a melody that both uses fretted notes as well as the open strings to kind of create this cascading melodic structure. And in this workshop, I'm not necessarily teaching you how to play this song, because you probably aren't familiar with the song, but what I'm going to break down is some of the key elements that make it easier to start approaching this style if you want to try to learn this style or to compose in this style. So for starters, a big thing that I've seen people do when they're starting to learn this style that actually becomes kind of a detriment is that something that they forget to do is they're trying to hit these notes and hammer-ons and pull-offs, and we've maybe all done that before when we're playing chords and there's within the chord we're moving a finger or something to create a hammer-on or pull-off. Because we're not fretting any chords, there's a kind of extra stressor on the accuracy, because we don't have our hands kind of locked in place in a chordal position, and all we're doing is taking one finger off or on that's already within the chord that we're playing. Here we're having to kind of come out of nowhere and just be accurate with single fingers, and there's only one finger of the four that are in contact with the guitar more often than not at any one time. So being really accurate with it is essential. And the best way to do that is looking at thumb position. And I'm resting my thumb. There's not a camera behind me, but I'm resting my thumb right in the unless they. Well, I was gonna say you might surprise me. There might be a camera behind me. I'm basically resting it right behind the middle of the guitar. And now, if you if you first learned classical guitar, your instructor probably told you to do that anyway. Most of us don't do that when we're playing standard chords. But for this style, it's really important, because the problem is if we were to hold the guitar neck like some of us do when we play chords, with our thumb kind of hanging up over the top or somewhere near the top, is that now in order to get hammer-ons and pull-offs, our fingers are really compacted. And trying to do this, one, I don't have a lot of room to get some extra pressure. Two, everything's kind of just compacted. So if I drop my thumb, and in essence it drops my wrist down, now my fingers kind of come out and curve back towards the guitar. And by having my thumb placed here, it's basically as if I didn't have the guitar neck there, I'm basically pinching towards my thumb, as opposed to trying to just, hit my finger against the neck. So not only does it provide me reinforcement behind the neck so that I can be accurate and keep the neck from moving if I'm just hitting it like this. And this is what I've seen some people doing working on hammer-ons, is like, not only is it hard to be accurate with your hand free floating out here, but it also moves the neck every time you hit it. So now this is reinforcement with the thumb, and it's also like you're pinching. Granted, depending on the hand position, my finger isn't always, trying to see with the camera angle, isn't always going to where my thumb is, but I'm kind of creating this pivot point or this fulcrum to work off of. So that's kind of the first thing, is hand position, dropping the hands down, letting the fingers curve around. The other reason for that is that to get a solid hammer-on, if we were to hit the hammer-on with the pad of our finger, that's the softest part of our finger, where all the meat is. Now, it's where all the meat is, so there's less of an attack to it. Now, if you go more towards the fingertip, staying away from the nail, this is another reason why it's better to have shorter nails on the left hand, which most of you probably do, except maybe the ladies, is that you're trying to hit on the tip of your finger, because that's where there's the least amount of flesh before you get to the bone. So it's, a hammer-on. Essentially, we need a little... It's the difference between a hammer and a mallet, really. It's like you have your hammers at the tip. This is kind of more like a rubber mallet, which is not going to have as clear of a tone. So here I can get that note by hitting it a lot more solidly. Now, for the ladies, if you do have long fingernails, it's kind of finding that somewhere in between point so that your nails aren't clicking against the fretboard or catching the next string up. So that's the kind of general rule. And the other thing I think that what should be very helpful is to remember is that, one, this playing style is it's quiet. The dynamic range is very small relative to if you were picking. Whether you're finger picking or using a flat pick or strumming, you know that when you do that, you can play, very quietly up to very loud. And I don't have to do that here to demonstrate. We know that because the dynamic range of the guitar when it's strummed or picked down here separately is quite large. But now the dynamic range of two-hand tapping is very small, and the problem is the louder you try to play it, the less expressive it actually gets. So when your dynamic range is smaller, or let's say the way we typically play, when the dynamic range is very large, by varying how you strum, you can increase the intensity or lower it, and you have quite a bit of play in that dynamic range. When the range is very small, if you try to play loudly, one, not only does it sound clunkier, but two, you lose all the nuance. And this style is it's nuance and subtlety is essential to this style to make it as expressive as possible. So I always say the lighter you can play this style, the more, it takes far smaller of a movement to create a subtle dynamic range in this limited dynamic range that we already have in this style. So in general, if you have a pickup on your guitar, the better off you're going to be, because what you're going to want to do when you're playing live or plugged in is you're going to turn it up a little bit, because you're not going to hit anything so hard that it's going to explode your speakers. Then you're going to get all that little nuance that's in between the notes. So in this playing this, the other trick then is that in order to make a melody seem consistent, especially when half the notes might be fretted and half of them might be open strings, is being very conscientious about making the loudness of the notes, the fretted notes versus the open notes, to be very similar. So melodically, you wouldn't hear a melody that goes like bo ba bo ba bo ba, necessarily. So you can hear just this opening phrase. There's an open string, this second string, in between each of those notes. Now, I'm trying to be very subtle the way I lift off on it and not pull off too much, so I'm going to exaggerate just to show what that might sound like. So that just sounds like someone's just pounding away. So I'm trying to play softly and make sure that the fretted notes are the same volume as the open strings. And of course, you get to make the choice, depending on the most important notes of the melody, to make those stand out as much as they should. And anything else that's more just kind of notes that happen within the melody that are not necessarily key notes, you can kind of determine. That becomes your own expression. But in general, you want it to be as smooth as possible. So, and the other kind of crutch that I've seen in a lot of two-hand tapping styles is I love this style because it has the ability to be so melody-driven. Now, there's also a lot of this technique can be taken and just made to be a percussive, riffy thing as well, which is cool in its own right, in a different way. So one thing I always encourage if people want to start doing this is to not just get caught up in the technique of it, in the overusage of the technique. It's still to be, I still come at it from a composer standpoint, like what do I want the melody to do? Where do I want it to go? So always being conscientious of humming a melody instead of getting stuck in a pattern that just goes. I could just say, I could just do all sorts of stuff on the 5th and 7th fret, and it sounds kind of cool and spacey, but you can't really hum it. So, granted, this is a stylistic choice or subjective choice. So to me, I always like to be making sure I'm staying focused on what I'm trying to get the melody to do. I'm less concerned with playing more notes and more concerned with making every note that I play count even more. That's the the general hand position. Trying to stay away from getting caught into just patterns. And the thing is playing in different alternate tunings. As I mentioned, I'm in DADGAD. Different alternate tunings will lend themselves will kind of start to reveal different melodies to you, because you may start with a melody that you're fretting because that's where we're used to trying to like pluck out a melody. But we can't necessarily go. I mean, you can do that where I didn't use any open strings, but then all of a sudden you're kind of boxed in. So the more you can find ways to use the open strings, you might be surprised melodically because there's more leaps in between the notes, which to me just lend themselves to become more interesting melodies instead of it just being really just up and down the scale by one, whole step or a half step. The thing you'll find as the farther you get up the neck, and I'm kind of exposing some of the things that make it difficult to make this sound good sometimes, so that hopefully when you start to experiment with it, you have a workaround for when things start to sound weird. Is the tapping style. The farther up the neck I get, the more you start to notice what's called backstring noise. And what that is if I fret this note, all we're hearing is the note that's on that second fret. If I get up to the 5th fret, we're really only hearing that note still. But as I get it farther up, for example, here I'm on the 9th fret, and this is where I'm not sure how much the mics are going to pick it up, but I'm going to over-exaggerate so you can hear what I'm talking about. Backstring noise is referring to what's happening between my fretted note and the nut. Typically, when we think of playing guitar, we're mostly concerned with we fret notes that we want to hear that are dependent upon where the fretted note is going back to the bridge. However, on a tapped note, and especially one with such a small dynamic range, whoops, there's our primary note. However, you might be able to hear that note, not so pleasant. So this kind of factors in a little bit too, depending on what your pickup is. If you have just a saddle pickup, you're probably mostly just going to hear this primary note that we want to hear. However, if you have any sort of internal mic or contact piezo pickup, which is picking more the resonance of the body of the guitar as well as just acoustically what's happening as opposed to just the string going over the saddle, you're going to start to notice some of these kind of uglier notes. So part of a way to avoid that is to not sit on those notes as long. And when I'm in this song, I'm kind of there's a point where if I hit up on the 12th fret, which has got the note is only a half step apart. This note is the same as if I fretted on the 13th fret, but the note that I really want to hear is on the 12th fret. So it's kind of a weird little conundrum to work around. So just be aware of that as you're going up the neck, and we'll find different ways to disguise it. And I'm going to play another song in a little bit that's going to demonstrate a technique to get rid or to bring that backstring note more in line with the chord or the note that you really want to play, so that it doesn't clash quite so much. So now let's take a look at, actually one more demonstration regarding the melody is in the very intro of this song. There's another cool thing being in the altered tuning that you can do is, so now if I hit that note, I'm going to go from a dead stop where there's no notes ringing, and I'm just going to play one note and then stop, lift up that string, and we're going to hear what we hear. Now it's going to be very quiet, so I'm not sure how much that's coming through. But basically, because I'm in an altered tuning, I'm able to let all these other strings ring. So if I get a little ways into this melody and stop, we're going to hear that already sympathetically all these strings are going to start to ring on their own, which is kind of like what a sitar has all these sympathetic strings to do. As you're playing, these other notes are just kind of resonating on their own. Almost instead of it sounding like I'm playing a chord underneath it, it's just kind of ringing there. Let's see, we've got a bunch of notes now that are ringing that I didn't even play. So that's kind of happening at all times, even when I'm playing bass notes, that these middle strings that I'm not ever really fretting are just kind of ringing sympathetically, which make it sound like there's a pad going on behind what you're actually playing. Another beautiful thing about dadgad and many other alternate tunings. So now let's take a look at the right hand. Right hand is basically doing all the bass notes. Another key thing is having the thumb placement. The thumb always at the back, because we have our thumb here that's holding our position for our left hand. Same thing here, we're just kind of pinching the neck. There we go. I'm able to hold that there. One, it makes it, I'm more accurate with it. Two, you can also notice that I'm kind of stacking my fingers, because if I just try to do this, one, there's a whole lot of play in my hand, which just creates more wiggling in the neck. It's not as accurate, it's not as strong. And I don't necessarily need all these fingers to do a lot of different things. Now there's a part of the song where I use my index and my middle finger, but here I'm stacking them just to create a nice solid way to hold that chord. So, and there's a couple combinations of, you could call it a strum, just kind of lightly brushing the strings to create either on an upstroke or a flick on the downstroke to create a little extra movement. So let's just play that intro, or I'll skip the intro and go to the A section where I'm playing both the bass and the melody. And I'll do it slowly. You see there's a flick in there, so there's an upstroke as well as a downstroke flick. And as either one of my hands moves up or down the neck, that thumb is basically staying in place and just kind of sliding. Just imagine like you've got like this little, like a little bolt that sticks out, and there's like a slot in the back of the neck, and it just kind of slides up and down like a little rail. And that just keeps you from losing your place too much. Now, granted, this is a still very visual thing that when you have two hands moving to two different places, I think of this style kind of like a piano player would. At first, this looks, not to belittle, I'm not trying to say it looks complicated, but really, it can't be any more complicated than how everyone learns how to play piano. They have two independent hands doing two different things, and a lot of times they have different rhythms. So their left hand is doing the bass, and their right hand is doing the melody, more or less. So all we're doing is basically taking that concept, flipping the roles, making the right hand do the bass or the chords, and the left hand doing the melody. The one thing that makes this more complicated is our sight lines, because as soon as my left hand goes for a lower note and my left hand is up higher, I'm kind of lost sight, and it's not like I'm looking down at the neck like you can look down on the piano. So that's kind of the catch that we have in this style. So as we get further in, this song is I think is a really good starting place, because for the most part each hand has a singular role. Again, the left hand is primarily doing single notes in combinations with pull-offs to use the open strings to create a melody. The left hand, for the most part of this song, is really playing two-note chords. And because of the tuning, with these bottom strings being a root and a fifth, the D and the A, all my chords, the root and the fifth of the chords, are going to be built on the same fret for each chord. So for the most part, this song pretty much stays in this shape, doing the chords as the melody moves around. So, but when I get up to the bridge section of this, that's when this starts to switch, and I switch off on fingers. So I'm kind of alternating, still keeping my thumb anchored in the back, because now I need to kind of, I'm more or less pinching like this to be accurate. Wrong from. So here's another one. Another little workaround. The downside of the tapping thing, as far as when you're on a chord, your sustain only on that note only lasts as long as you're holding down the note. And the great thing about this alter tuning is that there are open strings that will ring longer. If I need to move to another chord, there's something that's still probably ringing through as I have that little split second move in between sections. So what I do in this section, let me get back into it. That's right here. The note I want to play is this 5th fret. So or 7th fret. So I could go. Now I could have this big gap, but then I've got a big leap to get down here. So what I do instead is this is kind of a weird pluck / pull off, pull up, I would call it, because I'm basically I'm already fretting this note here on the 6th string on the 4th fret. And instead of jumping up to here, I'm kind of flicking my finger down, and the A string, or the 5th string, is kind of catching the opposite side of my finger to get that to ring. And the reason I do that, one, it's to avoid this big spread, which I know is going to be followed by a big leap down on the 2nd fret. But I'm able to let that note ring as I get set up for this other chord without having to be fretting it. So just to do that phrase again slowly. So it's just little workarounds to try to get the most out of this, because there's not a lot happening at any one time. However, listening to it, it sounds like there's a lot of motion happening, but it's not as big and dynamic as a strummed or finger-picked part that might have a lot more subdivision. That's the other thing I love about this style, is that there's the opportunity for so much space. Now you may be hearing in your speakers too that when I'm playing that there's a little reverb on it, which always just kind of helps sweeten this style up, especially when it's a slower, less busy song where there's just a lot of space and a lot of ringing. And it just kind of extends some of the notes a little bit to make it feel fuller. One of the other little things is you'll also notice on the bass strings, like anytime you're playing standard guitar and you slide a finger on one of your wound strings, you get that string squeak. Because the dynamic range of two-hand tapping is so small, the sound of a string squeak relative to the note that you're playing, the string squeak has the potential to be just as loud, if not louder, than the note you were just playing if you slide your fingers. And now it's inevitable that you're going to slide your fingers at some point and you're going to have some string squeak, which we could just argue and say the sound of string squeak is kind of a characteristic sound of the acoustic guitar, and it is. So it's not about trying to get rid of them altogether, but if we're trying to make our melody notes and our bass notes be in complement to each other and to not have any one of them dynamically too far out from the other one so that they feel like they're connected, is a way to kind of minimize the amount of string squeak you get. Now the string squeak is essentially happening from me lightening up on the pressure a little bit and then sliding. So right there, that string squeak was louder than the note. But now, if I squeeze the note harder instead of it's kind of counterintuitive, because normally we think I'm going to move my chord, so we slightly lessen the pressure and we slide or move to wherever our next chord is. But when I know I'm going to be sliding on the bass strings, I actually, once I clamp down, I squeeze harder just before I move the chord, because it's going to minimize the amount of string squeak, because the more I let up on the note and slide my finger, the more resonant the rest of the string is going to be to that slide. Oops. So that's quieter than that is. So that's kind of a cool little trick that I've found really helps, because especially if you have to turn your guitar up a little bit to play this style live and you're plugged in, all of a sudden they're going to be like, oh, it sounds so nice, but then every other chord is like, rah, rah, rah. So that's a way to get around it. So I think I should, at any point, you can jump in before I don't know as far as time goes, if I should play the other song or if we should get to some questions first.
Yeah, we've got quite a few questions, and we have
let's do questions,
giveaway coming up too. So
Okay.
Let's see, we've got one here from Dev DeCoste. Are you using your forearm to mute the strings?
I'm not. My arm is never coming in contact with the strings. If I have time to play that other song, I'm going to demonstrate where I might do some muting, but it'll be more like a standard mute. But my arm is not in contact with it at all, which is also maybe a tip. If you're doing this style, if you're wearing a really baggy shirt, chances are at some point that shirt's going to like hit the strings and mute them in a way that you don't want to. So yeah, there's no camera angle that really shows. Have to be can't really get above it, but it's not coming in contact. There you go. So it's all pretty much always that distance.
Patrick 419 asks, is the action required to be acutely low for this style?
It definitely helps if your action is in a good playable position. This guitar is not set up any differently than any other guitar to be specifically set up for tapping. So I still strum on this guitar, and I will flat pick as well. So, but all I have to do is like have it low enough where it's comfortable, because any guitar that's just kind of got a high action is just hard to play. And the higher the action is going to be, the harder it is to be accurate with these notes, because it's just getting that string to get down to the fret, because the sound is actually generated by the steel string without me having to pluck it. It's the steel string hitting the metal fret. That is the same note as if I were to pluck it. But there's a difference in the tonality of a pluck and a hammer. There's like a transient, which is like the first attack of the note is sharper, and it's kind of because it's metal on metal sound instead of like a plastic pick or your finger or your fingernail. It's just a subtle tonal change. So the action is, again, it's low, but it's not. I didn't set it up to be extremely low because of the style. Because if I set it up any lower than this, and then I go to flat pick something, once you flat pick, the strings are vibrating, a lot more, so that all of a sudden they're going to start buzzing a lot more. So that's the thing, is like you have to find that happy medium depending on your style. So.
Okay. Doug asks, are Hammerons and Pulloffs a beginner skill to practice, or should other basics be polished before moving to this skill? Well,
Hammerons and Pulloffs in general, typically when we first learn Hammerons and Pulloffs, we're learning them within chords that we're already playing. Now, I'm not in standard tune, so I can't do it. I'll do a slight variation on the C chord. So like this is how I first learned Hammerons and Pulloffs. Playing a C chord, it looks different than a standard C because of the tuning I'm in. But I'm just pulling off this finger, and it's not just the difference between a pull-off, or the thing that to be essential to become a pull-off, is that you're actually pulling the string. It's not a lift-off. If I just lift the finger off, you don't hear that other note that I'm revealing. But if I pull down slightly, this is an exaggeration, but I'm kind of pulling in that direction so that, it's like, for any of you who played, you can kind of see the calluses. There's little grooves, and that little lip on the other side of the groove becomes like your pick in a way. That little meaty part of the finger is what's catching the string enough as I pull down to get the attack of that open string. And again, because of my hand position, as I mentioned in the two-hand tapping stuff, I'm still trying to hit, based on where that groove is. It's on more the tips of my fingers than it is on the pads. Because again, that's where the bone is. That's where I'm going to get the best attack. And I need the note. I need the finger the hardest part of the finger to hit the the fretboard in order to get that note to ring out. So I would say for beginners, if this might be kind of a leap because there's a lot more demand for accuracy and subtlety. But if you want to work on just this idea of independence of fingers within a chord. And most of the time, it's a note that you're already fretting, and all you're doing is pulling off to an open string and then putting your finger right back where it was. That's a great place to start working on Hammerons and Pulloffs. And a lot of times, depending on the chords you're playing, most of them might be focused on your index and your middle finger, depending on the tuning you're in or how complex the chord is. That looks like a D chord, but it's not sounding like one because of the tuning I'm in. But here I'm moving the middle finger. So if you're more of a beginner, you might feel frustrated to say, like, well, it's hard enough to get my fingers in the right place at the right time just to play a D chord. But then working on that independence to say, like, these fingers can hold their place, and this one can still move. That's going to gain you some more of the independence, not to mention the strength for those fingers to act completely independently. So.
Okay, and we'll be doing the giveaway here in a few minutes.
Okay.
A few more questions, I think, till then. Rod asks, how difficult is this style on your wrists in comparison to others?
I don't find it any more difficult. Granted, I've been playing it for a long time, and I know learning it, chances are when you're learning it, you might notice more, let's just call it pain, because you do it so over and over and over again trying to get it right. And sometimes we just kind of overdo it in the practicing because it's the same repetitive motion over and over and over again. Now, when I play it, to me, this is not a challenging technique to play in the sense that I'm not hitting these notes all that hard. I don't, like, just because it's called a hammer-on doesn't mean it has to, hammer. Again, that dynamic range is small, so, and I don't have to, like, release my fingers to get that big attack. The farther off I go, I may get a louder note to, like, slam my finger down, but chances are I'm also opening myself up to more. I'm going to be more prone to error, hitting the wrong string. But see, my fingers really, for the most part, lifting no more than an inch off, usually more like a half inch, because it just keeps my position. The fingers are where they need to be. So I don't notice anything on the wrist, and that's another reason for dropping the hand down, because wrist pain comes from, like, if you drop your hand too far and your wrist is really bent. I'm trying to figure where the camera is. That's when you get wrist pain, when you're really wrenching on your wrist. Here, I'm trying to keep it nice and rounded, so it's not bent sharply, and it's also not doing this, because that limits my fingers. So, long and short of it, I don't notice wrist pain at all. I never have, because I look at this as being a very gentle style. So I'm not really wrenching on anything.
Okay, I think we'll just do this one, then I'll hand it over to Jason for the giveaway. Chris Lee asked, do you need a special type of string to play in this style?
You don't, but when you play in any alternate tuning, chances are the alternate tuning is going to be lower than standard. Very few tunings that I ever do require me to take a standard tuned guitar, E, A, D, G, B, E, and tune any of them higher or tighter. Sometimes I'll raise the B string up to a C, but that's really it. Every other tuning I do goes down. So the more slack you put in your strings, if you down tune to an alternate tuning, or just take your standard tuning guitar and lower it a whole step or something, you're creating more slack up here. And so I always use medium gauge strings, because if I use light gauge strings and lessen the tension that's on the string, it just gets, it has more play to it, meaning it just gets more noodly. It gets, it's too loose. And the looser it is when you're playing the note, the more prone it is to have intonation problems. Like if I were to just play this bass note, but if I were to squeeze harder, it goes sharp. So now that was like a really forceful squeeze. But if I was playing on light gauge strings, there'd be even more play. I could have more potential to go sharp. So we're already focusing so much on trying to be, getting all our notes that we're fretting and tapping to be of equal value. Now, if we crank on one too much, it could go sharp. So the lighter gauge strings have more problems in that, and they down tune, they just lose some of their punch. So it's not a special string, but I find that because it's an alternate tuning, that the medium gauge just has a little more meat behind it to resonate a little more.
All right, hand it over to you, Jason.
Giveaway this guitar.
Okay, so yeah, Justin, if you want to pick up that guitar over there, this is a Fender acoustic. I haven't played this one myself, but it looks like a nice guitar. And so, with that said, we are going to start the giveaway. I'm going to give everybody about 30 to 45 seconds to kind of be here and ready for this. And as with always, I know you guys are tired of hearing it, but we do have to say it every time. For the giveaways, the guitars can be shipped to Canada, the US, and Mexico only. If you are a winner that is outside of that area, meaning the UK, Asia, Russia, anywhere like that, we can't ship the guitar, but we will send you a $100 gift card that you can use on pretty much anything, though we would hope that you would use it on something musically related. So I will ask if people would please be quiet in the chat while we're doing this so that the winner can see and both hear their name being announced. As with everybody else, you'll have 2 minutes to respond. If you're outside of that 2 minutes, we will move on to the alternates that have been selected as well. So I'm going to give it about 15 seconds here, and then I will announce the name both in the chat and live here. All right, and then Justin, I'll ask you to go quiet for a second so everybody can hear. All right, so here we go. Congratulations, Bradley Anderson. Bradley Anderson, you're the winner of the Fender acoustic guitar. Please respond within 2 minutes to let us know that you are here and where you live. You've got 2 minutes, and I think I saw him saying stuff. He should be here. He's here and he's in Ohio. Excellent. Bradley, awesome. You've won this great guitar. Please email us at support@jamplay.com with your full name, your shipping address, and your phone number, and we will get that out to you. Congratulations, Bradley. So let's go ahead and get back to some playing.
Hey, hold on just 1 second, everyone. We know that the Facebook feed went down.
Oh, the Facebook feed went down.
It has a 4-hour limit, so we're gonna have to stop and start live stream again after this session.
Okay, so after this session, we're going to stop live stream and restart it so that the Facebook feed can continue, just to let you know. But right now, we're back to some Justin Roth. Thanks, guys.
All right. I'm going to play another song of mine.
Just unmute the tuner.
Oh.
Get your reverb back in there.
Was that on the whole time? Because I was. Well, that's my fault. That operator error here. Well, you heard no reverb. Now you will. All right, this is still in Dadgad here, and this is called Bagshot Row. that's where the reverb tail comes in handy at the end. So one of the things I wanted to demonstrate, I totally botched in that performance. When I was talking before about the backstring noise, as you get up higher up the neck, we have this backstring noise that starts ringing, it starts getting ugly. So there's one section of this song where I do, the notes are basically so when I go up here, we're hearing both of these notes. So a way that I got around to try to minimize the effect of that, because it's a spot where there's the least amount of its motion, so there's more space, it's more likely to be heard, is if I don't like this note, I can fret behind this note to change what this note does. It's in the same sort of way. If that's the note when I'm fretted on the 12th fret, the more I move that way, the higher the note's going to go. Doesn't follow the scale near nice and neat like when you go the opposite direction. But so what I was able to find is that if this is the note I want it to ring, you know, the main note, and this only being a half step off is not the note really what I want to complement it. That still doesn't really sound great together. But it's almost a major third. This note's sharp relative to this one. However, because it's more of a harmony within the chord that I'm playing, it minimizes the role of the backstring noise and kind of disguises it a little bit. So I go like this. So you hear these two notes. I'm fretting on the 8th fret and on the 11th fret on the same string, which most of the time would be pointless if we're picking. However, I'm just trying to change this back noise. So the difference is so I've been able to just change the harmony of the backstring noise. Not because I want that note to be, it's not going to be as loud as the main note, but it's at least a little bit more in sync with the chord that I'm playing so that it doesn't stand out to be quite so ugly and clashing. So. And this is kind of another little trick, a little switcheroo a little bit on the fingers. For a moment, I'm using the left hand, which is typically for the bass. I'm sorry, the right hand, that's typically for the bass, and switching it to a roll of a melody so that I can change up something down here. So. So it's kind of almost switching roles. For a second, this gets a little bass, more of a bass line run, which involves a hammer-on, kind of into a slide. So again, in sequence. And there's a little flick of strum I kind of forget until I get into it. There's a little flick of the thumb to get the bass note. Flick. So here I'm switched again. My right hand is holding a melody note while my bass note's doing or my left hand's doing this little bass run. And then that's where it goes. I switch back. And switching it back up there. So it's kind of a little, sometimes you got to figure out how to get the note that you need, and you only have so many hands, so you have to switch roles. And this song is a little more complicated, I would say, because it's a lot more moving parts, while Fatima's Waltz had really just, for the most part, 2-note blocked chords, and while this one's more of like a walking bass line all throughout. So,
All right.
a couple other...
It's time to wrap up.
Time to wrap it up. All right.
That was fascinating. Everyone on the chat has really been enjoying that, but we should go ahead and wrap up.
Okay, great. Great to be with you guys. Good luck on the drawings.
Get